Hello, my name is Dylan Burns. I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor working in the south of England in a small town called Lewis. Um, and I might just share my screen. So this presentation is entitled Transpersonal, Towards a Model of Integrative Therapy for Past Life Trauma. In November 2021, I began working online with Sam, which is not his real name. And Sam, who's then 30, was going through the process of separating from his partner as he transitioned from female to male. He also reported memories of 4 past lives: soldiers in Vietnam, World War II England, the American Civil War, and the American War of Independence. This case study was prepared in collaboration with Sam, and it's become an important aspect of our ongoing work together. Sam will join me for the Q&A after this presentation. We'll be exploring the challenges and sensitivities of working with a client who has memories of reincarnation, and the added layers of working with a transitioning transgender client and of supporting someone with traumatic early and past life experiences. Some of the material presented may be disturbing. It's not too graphic, but Sam had a previous therapist who was a psychic medium and found herself unable to work with the traumatic aspects of the case. My original aim in presenting this case was to explore an integrative stance that contains all of the elements I believe to be important in supporting an XR client. But in the weeks leading up to the symposium, we made some further discoveries about extraordinary connections between Sam's past lives and some paranormal events in my own life. And this has demanded something of a rewrite. We could already see before this that there was some guidance involved in bringing us together. But after this, it was undeniable. And so in the closing section of the talk, I'll be reflecting on the multiple synchronicities that have occurred and asking what the implications of this might be for us as therapists. A synchronicity draws us into deeper connection with our clients, suggesting that therapeutic boundaries, though useful in certain contexts, may ultimately be meaningless conventions. If we're all connected in ways that transcend time and space, then perhaps the most therapeutic approach would be to acknowledge that interconnection and interdependence. So if I can just get onto the next slide. Here we are. So integrative therapy, an integrative approach to counseling is different to one that's simply eclectic, where we mix and match different approaches in response to the needs of the client. Integrative implies, I think, that there are 2 or more modalities that are in conversation with each other. They may be paradoxically opposed to each other, but no one of these modalities or theories will dominate or fully answer every question. And for reasons I'll go on to explain, I call this approach weird therapy. And it involves 2 dimensions of integration, forming together a compass rose, as we can see here. The first of these integrations is between developmental and transpersonal approaches to psychotherapy. And Ken Wilber's approach, his concept of the pre-trance fallacy, is useful. So he argues that developmental psychology, which seeks to understand everything in terms of the past, and particularly childhood and infancy, will always fail to understand anything transpersonal, such as meaning or purpose, wisdom, mystical states, calling, paranormal events. And on the other side of the equation, a purely transpersonal lens will also be unhelpful and will tend to cause spiritual bypassing. As Wilber says, once these 2 conceptually and developmentally distinct realms of experience are theoretically confused, one tends either to elevate prepersonal events to transpersonal status, or to reduce transpersonal events to prepersonal status. And if we're taking reincarnation seriously, as the evidence suggests we should, all of us are cycling through repeatedly, so that the pre-ego or developmental and the trans-ego or transpersonal alternate like a waveform of rising and falling energy. The second of these integrations is between the somatic and the relational. I trained in Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, which is a body-centered and nervous system approach to resolving trauma. Levine's explicit inspiration for this is the work of Stephen Porges and his polyvagal theory, and so it has a neuroscientific basis. But it also has deeper roots in the work of Wilhelm Reich and others in the body psychological and energy healing traditions. And having used SE with clients for many years now, it's clear to me that while the body focus is tremendously powerful, it's incomplete because it neglects the dimension of relationality. The power of SE is that it addresses our animal nature, our nervous system directly. Its weakness, as with almost all body-focused therapies, is that it largely ignores the importance of relationship to human beings. And I think a really good analogy for this was provided by a recent scientific study which looked at the question as to whether a spider's web could be considered part of its brain. The argument for this was that if the spider's consciousness was changed by, for example, giving it LSD or coffee or any other drug, it would produce a very different sort of web. And equally, if the web was altered, for example, tightening or loosening certain strands, the spider's behavior would change in response to that. And this explains why spiders are able to perform very complex tasks such as counting, although even if they have a very, very tiny brain. And the size of the spider does not affect their ability to perform these tasks. And in the same way, we could say that human beings exist only within a web of relational connections. And to look at a person as having a problem, a mental health problem, for example, or something difficult going on in their nervous system or their body, is to miss this relational dimension, which, though invisible, is extremely powerful. And in this presentation, we'll be looking at one aspect of that, which is the relational effect of the emotions of guilt and shame. In particular, these emotions transform the nature of trauma from what animals experience, and they create an extra layer of difficulty for humans in releasing their trauma. If we believe that we have to undergo repentance and punishment in order to be reintegrated into the tribe, then we will stay in a traumatized state until we're forgiven. Shame and guilt correspond in somatic terms to a state of collapsed surrender, what Stephen Porges called dorsal vagal activation. Relationally, these emotions signify that I'm weak and I'm not a threat. I hang my head in shame, and you can see that I'm sorry for whatever it is that I'm supposed to have done. And the case study that follows will illustrate how guilt is so fundamental to us that it can survive the death of the body. And it's important to say here that the emotion of guilt does not imply wrongdoing, any more than its absence implies innocence. Anyone who doubts this should watch the 2012 film, The Act of Killing, a documentary by the filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer, in which he interviewed the perpetrators of the Indonesian massacres of the 1960s. Here's three of them, three of the people featured in this film, enjoying a day out. These men have always been treated, although they're mass murderers, as heroes. And most of them, consequently, had no sense of guilt about what they had done. So bringing a relational lens to therapeutic work illuminates certain aspects that are crucial to therapy. The relational dimension includes, quite obviously, the relationship between the therapist and the client. And this next slide shows a relational spectrum which was created by Michael Soth, who's my supervisor and whom I've worked with for several years. And so this spectrum, from on the left, a collusive friend. A therapist can be a friend or even collusive, can support the client in delusions that they may have. And at the other end, the therapist can be a doctor, can be a professor, a sage, a shaman, or even a fairy godparent performing miracles. And at this extreme, the client's power almost completely disappears. So on the left, the client can have all the power, and on the right, the client has none of the power. And in between these two extremes, there's a whole spectrum of potentially helpful stances and relational spaces that we might need to navigate. In Sam's case, we needed to address multiple layers of shame that tended to put him in the place of being less than. His struggles with anxiety, depression, and trauma, his transitioning, and also his past life experience, which in a world ruled by materialistic and scientific assumptions must appear delusional and pathological. All of these factors potentially create huge power imbalances in his relationship with a therapist. And this is one reason why this case study has been done in collaboration with Sam. He's not being presented to you as someone who struggled in life and whom perhaps we should feel sorry for. He's a skilled historical researcher, and he works with some of the leading figures in reincarnation research, such as Jim Matlock. And he's in fact the creator of the website for the International Center for Reincarnation Research. Sam's been involved in the writing of this presentation at every stage. Although he didn't want to use his real name, this event today is an important stage in his coming out, which for Sam is not so much about his transitioning, as it is about his past life experience. On one occasion, he said to me, "I'm not so interested in trans rights, I'm interested in past life rights." And I'm delighted that Sam will be joining us for the Q&A after this, and he can answer any questions that you may have. So as the other party in this relationship, the case has drawn me into the world of parapsychology in a way that I would never have anticipated. It seems that I've been guided to meet Sam and him to me. And this brings us into relationship and togetherness as we contemplate together the unfolding of a shared journey. If we've been guided to come together, then the question of who is in a position of power becomes less relevant. The magic is happening by itself in the relational field and not through the agency of either party. I might just stop sharing at this point for a little while. So the majority of those who have past life memories, as many of you will know, are small children. Sam is unusual in that he has clear recall of many details of his previous past life as James. And many of these details have been verified by James's living family members. James was an army helicopter pilot who was shot down in Tua Tien province, South Vietnam, on March 6, 1969. He was purported to have died shortly after the crash, and he was declared dead by the military in 1977. Sam, however, has memories of being interned for many years, and subsequent research by him and by others has provided strong evidence for this. The case is part of what's called the POW MIA controversy, prisoners of war missing in action. The US government has always denied that any soldiers were abandoned in Vietnam. Evidence provided by Sam to James's son has been shared by him with other POW MIA investigators, and Sam is regarded by a published author on this topic to be one of the best civilian researchers working today. Sam also recalls other past lives, as I mentioned before, soldiers in the American War of Independence, the American Civil War, and immediately before his life as James, as Ray, a South African-born American pilot killed during the Battle of Britain in 1940. It's fascinating that so many of the professionals speaking at this symposium are themselves exceptional experiencers. I want to say here a few things about my own background and my story in the period immediately before I met Sam. I previously followed an Advaita Vedanta spiritual path for over 20 years, practicing mantra meditation daily. And I had some strange experiences from this, including what's known as a Kundalini awakening and spontaneous non-dual consciousness. After training as a counselor, I began to explore psychedelics. And in 2016, I founded the Psychedelic Society of Brighton. In 2020, I brought together a group of therapists with the plan of establishing psychedelic retreats in the Netherlands where psilocybin is legal, under the banner of Inscape. And throughout the following year, we were exploring mushrooms together as a way to deepen our understanding of the work. My partner Lizzie, who I first met in 2020, attended one of the Inscape retreats on May 1st, 2021. And this is where things started to really get weird. There were 6 of us on the retreat, and even before we'd taken anything, we began to experience a sense of foreboding and the uncanny awareness that someone was missing. And on Lizzie's trip, she was transported back to a road accident that she was involved in many years before, in which a teenage girl ran out in front of her car and was killed. The dead girl was ever present in her trip as someone buried and forgotten. It was only later that she realized that that day, 1st of May, was the 17th anniversary of the accident. In the following months, I began to connect a number of dots. Lizzie's wing mirrors on her car were constantly being smashed off when it was parked. My car was clamped. My camper van had its windscreen smashed. The very worst moment and perhaps most dramatic evidence was that when my 3-year-old daughter slipped her hand out of mine and ran across a busy road towards Lizzie. And she'd never done anything like this before, and she'd never done anything like it since. But it was an obvious reenactment of what had happened in the accident. In November 2021, we organized another retreat. And again, there was a powerful sense of wrongness. This became quite comical in a sense when we discovered that the building we'd hired for the retreat had an enormous mural, a fresco depicting the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There were unexplained knocking sounds in the walls. And during her trip again, Lizzie had the experience of being shut into a dark room by one of the therapists who was sitting for us. And she felt that in this, that she was reliving the experience of the dead girl, dying on a dark road in scenes of panic and confusion. On the following morning after the retreat, I woke up at 4 a.m. and I began to write all of these pieces of evidence down in my diary. I concluded this by writing, "We are being haunted by a spirit, and her name is," I won't say her name, but in the exact moment I wrote her name, the smoke alarm outside my bedroom door went off. I turned off the smoke alarm, I turned to bed, my hair was standing on end, and I just wondered to myself, what would I do if this were a client? So I said, "All right, it seems like you need a hug." And then I felt something like millions of lines of energy that entered my body on the left side, and then it was gone. We never had any trouble like this afterwards, and it seems that I carried out an impromptu exorcism and helped a spirit to find her way to the world of the dead. Let's share my screen again. Although I'd experienced many strange things in my life, this was the first time that I'd had anything that I would definitively call paranormal. It marked the end of my association with psychedelic therapy, as it became evident that psychedelics take us into realms that we have little understanding of. I realized that my previous frame of reference was inadequate, and I wrote an unpublished manifesto entitled Weird Therapy. And this name was inspired by the Weird Studies podcast, which I love and I expect many of you may know. And This essay outlined my new stance of openness to the paranormal. And it was a few days after this that Sam contacted me for the first time. This was a striking enough synchronicity. But in April of this year, Sam discovered something about his previous past life as Ray, an American RAF pilot who was shot down and killed in 1940. His memory of dying included Ray's last word, which was a woman's name, not his wife. And these are two extracts from Sam's journal. Then as I level out, a plane comes from my right, seemingly out of the blue, comes from my right wing and then sort of head on before I can bank left. Bam, blinding pain for a moment, it hits my head. I say a word like Sarah, and then I'm instantly blitzed out of my body. And then later, I wanted to marry her, but I couldn't for some reason. I always think about tuberculosis or pneumonia. Something bad took her when we were about 18 or 19 years old. I never got over her. She was my true love. When Sam and I started to work together, I told him that I had just had a paranormal experience and that this had opened me up to taking his reincarnation experience seriously. We spoke about it as a synchronicity, but I didn't tell him about the specifics of that story until after Sam discovered what had happened to Ray. And this was only last month. Sam was searching on a UK archive of newspapers, and he discovered an account of a car accident that Ray was involved in. He was driving the car hit an icy patch on the road, and he survived, but the girl, whose name was Dora, survived. So Lizzie and Ray were both involved in car crashes where a young woman died, and were not held to be responsible. In neither case did they attend the funeral or have the opportunity to grieve what happened. And in both cases, it appears that the accident had a catastrophic impact on their later lives. Sam believes that Ray's wish to go to America to join the war effort there may have led to him being reincarnated as James, who was born just 3 months later in St. Louis, Missouri, in December 1940. He also suspects that Ray's overpowering guilt about killing the love of his life may have somehow led psychologically to James's terrible fate as a POW, abandoned and forgotten by his country in the camps of Laos. Sam was born on 29th of October 1990. His mother commented to her mother that there was something wrong with the baby. It should be a boy. She was told in response, it has girl parts, therefore it's a girl. As a toddler, Sam had a traumatic experience of waking up in a pool of his own vomit and of watching himself in this place from the point of view of a grown man. He had the memory of being trapped in a dark place whilst violently sick, and has always had a phobia of vomiting. He also had a phobia of anything connected to the military, but also a fascination with the military. On a school trip to Worcester Cathedral at the age of 8, Sam had an extreme adverse reaction to seeing a crude carving of men and women being burnt in hell. It triggered in him a compulsion to start reading the Bible every day in an effort to not get sick and go to hell. Sam believed that if he prayed hard enough, God wouldn't punish him. And so he'd make the sign of cross and pray to Mary, the saints, or to Jesus every time he defecated in an effort to save himself. Growing up as a girl created a deep sense of wrongness in Sam, and he also experienced attraction to girls rather than boys, although he repressed both of these. At about the age of 12, a boy at his school ran out in front of a car and was killed, and this created an inexplicable sense of survivor's guilt in Sam. Why him and not me? The change into womanhood deepened Sam's sense of wrongness about his gender, although this would not be faced consciously until many years later, leading to his courageous decision to transition. It was only in his 20s that Sam began to have clear flashbacks of Vietnam, facilitated by cannabis use, and to piece together the evidence of his former life. As we can see, Sam's life has been formed by the experiences of his past lives with a strong theme of guilt. The car crash with Dora and the well-meaning advice of others not to let it ruin his life seems paradoxically to have led to the ruination of several lives, raising questions about the vital importance of grieving a loss. It appears that this marked his soul and caused him, in his next life as James, to become an archetypal figure of the outcast, abandoned and forgotten in hell by his country, and denied even after death. Perhaps the most dramatic illustration of this was when Sam finally met one of James's family, James's daughter, in London in 2022. She told him that she had a memory from about 1989 or 1990 in which she was sleeping in her grandmother's house and woke up in an apparent hallucinatory trance. The Sacred Heart of Jesus portrait on the wall was lit up, and she could hear heavy boots in the hall outside her room and a powerful sense of anger. She said that she knew that it was her dad and that he had just died, and she told him to go away. Previous to this, Sam had told me that he believed James died around 1990, somewhere in the US, and that although he had returned to the US from the Vietnamese prisons, for some reason he never contacted his family again. And he also connects this to a memory he has of walking angrily about an unfamiliar house looking for someone. This may be a rare example of both a first and third person account of a ghost. James's daughter went on to tell Sam how James's disappearance in Vietnam was the best thing that could have happened to us, implying that her stepdad was a much better father than James had ever been. She seemed apparently unaware of what impact these words had on Sam, which I think we must interpret as further evidence of the powerful field of guilt that surrounds this soul as it travels through lives. We might recall another archetypal figure such as Cain, who murders his brother and is cursed, but is also protected, by the mark of the Lord, which means that his suffering is potentially eternal. This from the Song of Solomon. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? I raised thee up under the apple tree. There thy mother brought thee forth. There she brought thee forth that bore thee. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. For love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are the coals of fire, which have the most vehement flame. Love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. And it seems guilt also is as strong as death. Guilt is a feeling that gives social meaning to an event, as we've seen before. We can feel guilty for things we've done wrong, which is healthy, or we can feel guilty for tragic accidents in which we did nothing wrong, in which case the guilt is misplaced and toxic. If we trace the origin of this to Ray's car accident, then it's heartbreaking to understand that a tragic loss led to so much unjust self-punishment. We can't know how different things would have been had Ray's family had the wisdom to help him grieve the loss of Dora rather than bury it. My own experience with Lizzie and what she's told me about the terrible effects of the car accident she was involved in, not only for her and for the dead girl, but for many young people connected to this event, helped me to understand how an ungrieved loss continues to damage everyone involved. It seems that Ray, James, and Sam have suffered from what we might call societal ignorance of the importance of guilt, of grief, as the emotion that helps us to let go and move towards self-forgiveness. Bert Heilinger's family constellations therapy is an approach to psychotherapy that was developed from his observations of tribal practices in Africa. The basis of family constellations is that the most damaging thing is not a tragic event, but the denial of that event by the social context. As this case shows, that context is not just the events in my life or even in my ancestral heritage, but also in lives that have come before. So as I come to the end of this talk, I want to reflect a little more on the synchronicities that appear to tie me and Sam together. And I'll use the Weird Therapy Compass Rose to propose what is, I believe, a new understanding of synchronicity. Synchronicity is, of course, Jung's famous acausal connecting principle. In Jung's original case, his patient dreamed of a scarab beetle, and as she related this dream to him, a scarabid beetle was tapping at the window, and Jung brought it in to show her. Jung's patient was extremely rational in her approach to her problems, and he observed that the synchronicity allowed her to break through this rationality and accept the presence of unconscious forces of healing. Jung noticed that synchronicities seemed to appear when people were trapped in their own thinking and needed something to break them out of the trap. In the story that I've been telling, the synchronicity connects my own and Lizzie's personal experience to Sam's story over multiple lifetimes. The experience that I had prepared me not only to accept philosophically the possibility of the paranormal, it initiated me into the work that I would need to do to help Sam. And so when I say that it initiated me, I'm not merely saying that something happened which luckily prepared me. I'm saying that I was initiated. By what or by whom? And how might we think about this within the context of our work as therapists? It only takes a small adjustment of our awareness to notice that trauma and thoma, which is a Greek word for magic, are intimately connected. The greater the wound, the greater the magical effect as the spirit world attends to its healing. A synchronicity is not then merely a meaningful coincidence of apparently unconnected events. It happens within a relationship. Jung's patient needed him to notice the beetle and bring it into the room. Sam needed me to disclose what happened to me and to Lizzie in order to make the connection that I needed to be made. I believe it reveals a web of relational connection between us and perhaps between all of us, and it is this web that offers the opportunity for healing. In short, the healing isn't something that anyone has to do. We are being guided to find the connections between us, and as we do, things start to knit back together. A synchronicity is a coincidence of events that connect us to each other relationally and involve us in each other's healing and learning. Crucially, this healing and learning is affected not by us alone, but by the web of interdependence in which we sit, nested and held. The web wants to heal itself, and as it does this, we can heal too. And I should say that I don't think you can see the connection between trauma and thoma is with thanks to my friend Carolina Lebec. So here again, we have the integrative compass, and I want to suggest perhaps a more simple expression of that would be this. What this case suggests to me is that the transpersonal cannot be understood fully by reference to individual spirituality. We need also to bring a relational dimension to our understanding, since it's only when we recognize our mutual connectedness and interdependence that we can fully heal. This insight has the potential to transform our work with our clients, whether they're exceptional experiences or not. And in closing, I'd like to welcome anyone who's interested in weird therapy to visit the website and to join me in this exploration. That's weirdtherapy.org.uk. Again, I don't think you can see it because of my image there. And so that's the end of the presentation. We'll now have a Q&A, and hopefully Sam will be joining us, and we'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.